First of all, I'd like to thank you, many of you, for having put notes and comments and thumbs up on my posting for, what was it, yesterday, I think it was, on the Podestas and going deeper with the greater society or secret societies. But you know, there's some things that were commented about that always cause me pause. And first of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Q stuff. The pieces that I missed, there were a couple pieces I missed. Maybe some of you would say many more than that. But what I try to do is high grade it and look at the macro picture. And as many of you know that have watched me more than a couple times, I'm not going to go into every line, every sentence, every colon, every subcolon. So one of the things, and this is the last posting, has to do with timelines change, watch the budget. And there were a whole bunch of the anons on 8chan on the board that said, oh my gosh, does that mean that November 11th of this year is going to get put off? And apparently there is some other indication of that. I did not have that separately. If that is the case, I am manifestly disappointed. And I say that because what it tells me is, with the election, I think on the 6th of November, I had anticipated that by the 7th we would have the wave of whatever was going to happen will have happened. And if this put off is an indication that not everything's going to happen prior to the election, and that therefore November 11th has to be somehow the great parade that was going to be there, and the clarity and the completion that Q talked about was going to be done has to be delayed. It is a profound disappointment, because it tells me that the drops that, if that's the case, it tells me that the drops that have to occur for the October surprise to change the complexion of the election may not all happen. And what I played with, and I'll share it with you, not because I like it or because I think it's necessarily the answer, but what I played with is, all right, so this is going to get put off, which means that either that the election's in doubt or that people are going to get elected, and that would, in a way that might change the complexion of the way the government looks, the elected government looks, Congress looks, and that the plug would have to get pulled after the election to point out that some of the people that won should not be sitting in Congress, and that it is so dark that they would either withdraw or disappear or whatever afterwards, which is kind of the tenor of what we've been hearing all along, but not in that context. So if some of you have thoughts or ideas about whether or not that timetable relates to this midterm election and November 11th that was immediately following it, and or the budget for it, which they were talking about 10 million and then 30 million and now 80 million, excuse me, if that's the case and that it has been unbudgeted, then that's a problem. So that's the first thing. The second thing has to do with, and I had lots and lots of comments and I truly appreciate them, part of what I've tried to do is to take a look at what red pilling means. And I looked at a couple people today, including some people that were posting about red pilling, and basically what they were saying was, well, the MSM and the mainstream media and the neoliberals and the neocons and our historical stuff, especially with Obama and little shrubby Bush and, well, Hussein, I don't want to be positive about either of them, and then Clinton and then H.W. Bush, and H.W. Bush as vice president under Reagan, that you've got 38 years of this, and that or 36 of the last 38 years of that, and that is pretty much, if you see it correctly, if you see it in whole vision, that you've been red-pilled. And what I would say about that is, that's not true. It's not, you know, what has happened in the last 38 years is certainly gotten darker, certainly has progressed. the deep state cause in many, many ways, and throughout the world. If you take a look at the Middle East, it's totally destroyed. If you take a look at China, it has blossomed and now may be shrinking. If you take a look at the European Union, it may hold as strength, but it may also break up, which of course would be good for those of us who don't like the deep state. And of course, we've had turnarounds here, or at least the appearance of turnarounds here in the United States. But when going back to 1980, to the start of the Reagan administration, and tucking H.W. Bush in as the underlying deep state New World Order operative, and carrying out since then, because everybody since then has been of that lineage. Call them whatever you like. They've been of that lineage. Is not red pilling. Yes, it's a taste, it's a nibble, it's your first dosage, it's the first round. It gets rid of the worst of the rash, right? That's what it does. But if you don't look back to 1913 and the Federal Reserve Act, if you don't look back to Jekyll Island, you don't have any part of it, because anything that you do that reverses or erases the last 38 years will not help us at all. I mean, yes, it will get a bunch of people hung and or guillotined and or Gitmoed, but it won't fix the problem, because the underlying source of the energy, of the finances, of the money, of the cause of this goes back to the Federal Reserve. And before that, it went back to the second central bank, which was, I think, 1813 to 1833 or 36. And before that, the central bank that started with our constitutional government, I think in 89, and ran from 89 to 1789 to 1809, and before that. And so what I said yesterday was keep going back, but that's not it either, because this stuff goes back to the medieval times, it goes back to Roman times, it goes back to the formation of the Roman Empire and the conversion of the Roman Empire to the Roman, remember, Roman Catholic Church. I'm not knocking Catholicism, I'm knocking Roman Catholic Church, because that's the power center, and that's what was used for. And if you look at Constantine and the so-called conversion of Constantine, you'll see that he didn't convert at all. He simply transformed pagan churches and pagan religions all over the empire into Christian religions, because there was a better control center, and because many of his military rank and file had become Christians, and that's how he gained control over the military. And then you have the Nicene Convention and the manipulation and reconstruction of the Christian religion. And what many people don't understand about the original Christian church was that there were four main factions, and those four main factions, some of them followed on the Essenes and Gnostics, and there were other factions as well. But the controlling, managerial, top-down, bishop, cardinal, friar, priest, etc., patriarchal, manipulative form of Christianity, the most dogmatic form of Christianity, is the one that won the day with the Romans. Surprise, surprise. And those others were purged, not kind of sort of, gee, we don't like you, don't come to the church anymore. They were purged to death. They were actually tossed to the lions. Many of them were chased down. The Nag Hammadi scrolls that weren't found till, 1956, that had been hidden in canisters around Nag Hammadi, interestingly enough, that show the original documentation of the church, were protected and preserved, I think, by the Essenes, they're Gnostic Gospels, excuse me, were preserved by the Gnostics, and the Gnostics knew that they would be destroyed if the Romans got hold of them. And that's why they buried them. So if you take stock in the fact that this stuff has been politically transformational for 2,000 years, you have to take deeper stock of where we've been for all that time. And then I want to say, go back further. Yeah, I'm being a little crazy. So the Abrahamic religions, which include the Jewish religion, Christian religion, the Muslim religion, all comes out of Babylonia. All comes out of the city of Ur. All comes from Abraham, the father of the religions. And the stories that are in the Old Testament, including Genesis and the whole Adam and Eve and Eden and the rest of that, and the Noah deluge, are much older than Abraham. Much older than Abraham. They're pre-Abrahamic, okay? And they go back at least another couple thousand years. So they were oral history, Babylonian, Akkadian history that was a couple thousand years old when Abraham migrated out of Mesopotamia and Ur and Babylonia. And those stories are stories that had been passed on at that time for 2,000 years. How do we know that? Well, only over the last 150 years have we come to understand that. And some of you, many of you have bumped into this, and many of you have not. And I'm going to say to you that before you say there are infallible laws and rules and infallible history and that things are word for word exact, you need to back up to the pre-Abrahamic history which we have. And the reason that we have it is that the Sumerians, instead of using papyrus or even copper or rolled materials, used clay. And they used soft clay and made marks in it, cuneiform marks, much like Sanskrit and other cuneiforms, much like the Eastern religions. And those cuneiform marks then that clay was fired, and that record of those marks was locked in. And it wasn't until the less than 75 or 100 years, a guy named Kramer and Smith and some others, that finally figured out with the Akkadian language, the Babylonian language, the pre-Hebraic language, that they were able to tie the pieces together and come up with what the Sumerians were saving and doing. And they saved everything. They saved primers for grade school. They saved contracts. They saved agreements. They saved irrigation stuff. They saved accountings and texture material. But they also saved their own history. They saved the stories of Enoch, and clear back beyond that, they discussed and saved and talked about the deluge and the formation of Eden and the Adam, the Adam person, the Adam of the ancient religion, of the ancient beliefs, spiritual beliefs of the Sumerians. When you match that up to the Old Testament, you see where the source of that is first, and secondly, you see where the errors of the Hebraic historical context are, because it's the same story. And so what it tells us, excuse me, I'm busy. What it tells us is that the perfection and engagement and interaction of those Old Testament documents, which many of us thought were perhaps infallible or the true and correct story, are A, not correct, excuse me, I'm busy. Sorry, I'm trying to keep my grandson busy. My apologies. That the documentations of the Sumerians and the stories of the Sumerians predate the Abrahamic laws and rules and history by thousands of years, and that they are perhaps a more accurate depiction of what actually happened. If you take two stories, and this story is proximate to the source, and this story is oral history and 2,000 years later, you can expect that the one that's more proximate to the actual occurrence might be more accurate. There's no reason to believe that the one that's more remote to it is more accurate. There's no reason to believe that. And not only that, because the nice thing about the Sumerian tablets is when you fire them, you can't change them. You can't take the script and add 2 paragraphs 1,000 years later. You can't change it. You can't scribe it and re-record it and copy it on another piece of paper and change paragraphs and sentences and wording and implications 400 or 500 years later and then say this is the original when in fact it is a copy that post-dates the original by 500 years. So we gain fabulous information about the Sumerians, and the other part about this, which in some ways flies in the face of the Abrahamic tradition, the one God, the mono God that we have all in any of these traditions come to believe and appreciate and accept and embrace, is if you look at the stories around it and you compare them to the stories of the Sumerian time, of the Sumeric records, what you find is that those stories are the same stories, some of them, about the Hebraic God, but what they are lords, supreme or higher beings. Nobody treated them as the creator. They're higher beings, and there are multiples of them. There are at least 2, and there's Marduk, which may be 3, and there may be others as well. And what the Hebrews did was to take traits, stories, references of multiple lords that were seen as higher beings in the Sumeric legends and made one out of them. And part of the cognitive disconnect that I had growing up was that there was this wrathful God and this beneficent God, and it went back and forth. This God killed hundreds of thousands of enemies, killed everybody, helped to promote the deluge, required sacrifices, wanted everybody to bow down and to be inferior. And if you look at the Sumerian stuff, there was one like that. But the brother, the half-brother to that, to Enlil, Enki, is the good guy and may have been the snake in the Garden of Eden, may have told Adam and Eve, humankind, who they were and why they were the way they were, and was the benevolent one that gave Noah the inside information both about the coming deluge and also about how to save himself, his family, the seeds, the animals, and the rest of the storage that went into the ark. And that those things are, in the Sumerian tradition, are a more proximate, I'm not going to say true because I don't know either one, are a more proximate representation of that historical lineage from the Sumerians to the Akkadians to I think another to the Babylonians and to the Hebrews, which is a 3,000 year sequence of peoples in the Mesopotamian area that later comes to the area of Palestine. So when I talk about going back and going back and going back, we look at not only how that impacts us philosophically, metaphysically, spiritually, but also how it plays out in terms of power and the cohesiveness of power and how it has impacted us to this day. And it does have impacts, and it does have implications for us even now, and those implications are running through the process historically to today. So it's not for me to tell anybody when they're red-pilled or when they aren't, right? It's a process for all of us, and it is for me as well. And there are many, many miles to go, and there are layers to unfold in the process of doing so. What I have attempted to do, and I've attempted to do this in a methodical, rather measured way, is to expose and open history and back it up and take a look at what is legitimate and what isn't, and what may be questioned and what may not be questioned. And I've done that not to undo anybody's religion or philosophical beliefs or their political persuasions or their spectral interests along the political spectrum, but rather to cause questioning. That's the deal. Red pilling, ultimately red pilling for each of us is a matter of discernment. And that matter of discernment is you look at me and say, it's BS. I don't like what you say. Or you say, look, that doesn't fit with my belief. I'm going to look into it. I'm going to look at what the other alternatives say. I'm going to look at others that I trust and see if they say the same thing or not, and then accept or reject whatever it is that fits what you're working. I see what we know as humans as paradigmatic. That is to say, we don't have answers, okay? A paradigm is a working theory. And I see us as operating with paradigms. And to the extent that our paradigms are not thoughtful, that is, are not intuitive, have not been researched, are not compared to what other people think, are not looked at in the spectrum of a whole range of beliefs and ideas and different thoughts that other people have, to the extent they are not, the paradigm then is a faulty, flawed, inadequate paradigm because it has not been tested against what others may believe, what other things may be true, what implications there may be to what we think and know. And so what I would say, and I only use this historical example of the ancientness of the Old Testament as an example. It's just one of many, and there are hundreds of them that we can take back and look at. But what it does for me, because it is fundamental, is it makes me rethink my own spirituality. Now, there are people, some of you, who may feel, well, this guy's questioning the Bible, or this guy's questioning the Scripture, or this guy's questioning Catholicism or Protestantism or whatever, and therefore he is a heretic, and he is a disbeliever, and he must be an atheist, and he's got to be in the dark side. So let me answer to that as best I can. And that is to say this: it does not take away our belief in a higher source. It does not take away our sense that we are part of the universe and that the universe is God, or that there is a God that put us in motion at the start. It does not take away from any of that. What it does do is put us in a place of discernment, and to be rational and thoughtful and intuitive and spiritually adept about what it is that we come to understand and believe. I'm going to say to you that if your only spiritual underpinning is the same as your parents and your grandparents and your great-grandparents, and everybody believed what they believed because that's what they were born with, it is not a religion. It is not a spiritual thought process of discernment. It doesn't make it wrong. Not at all. It doesn't mean it's wrong. It may ultimately be exactly right, or largely right, or substantively right, but it is not discerned in a way in which you compare and contrast where you are and take a look at what it is what else is out there. So that's my point for today, and I am committed to continue to bring these pieces to us as part of the red pilling process, but also as part of our spiritual journey, number one. Number two, I see them as parallel and concurrent with our political journey, and I see them as concurrent and representative of our own spiritual walk. And I'm going to say to you, my little story is also a story of the unfoldment and learning and gifts that I was given in the world of hard knocks as I grew up and matured as a human, and that those things have driven me to take a look at these other aspects of our own lives. So that's why I'm here. Thank you so much for watching. I think this is critical stuff for all of us. And look, I look at this as a sharing process. There are many of you that have put in comments, books that you've read, additions, modifications. I like to see us maintain a dialogue. I am perfectly happy to be challenged. I am perfectly happy to have other aspects brought in or to be disabused of my thoughts because they are paradigmatic, right? To the extent that I have erred, to the extent that I have inadequate knowledge in a certain area, and my addition of knowledge in various areas will open and expand my purview of who I am and what I am as a spirit and a human and an American. To the extent that that can be advanced and expanded, I'm all for it, okay? I mean, that's the process. I can't say to anybody else, have discernment and not have it myself. So don't be bashful about saying, I think you made a mistake. It's okay. It's not only okay, it's the way it's supposed to be. So thank you so much for watching. This ended up being a little longer than I thought it would, but I think it's critical to the process and to the journey. Thanks so much for watching.